I am a storyteller at heart. I love to come up with ideas for stories and make something out of them, whether they're AU ideas or just full-on original projects. But the hardest part about having so many story ideas is getting started. I talk about my webcomic all the time, and it may look like that I've gotten it all handled, but what people don't see behind the scenes are all the previous years of failed projects and experiments I had to do in order to find what worked for me to start making In Harmony. Starting a new project is hard, and if it's something you know will take years and years of work to finish, then it can feel like you're trying to climb a mountain with your bare hands. So to keep the mountain metaphor going, I am hoping this video can act as a sort of recommendation for tools and the ways to be able to start your ascent to the peak of whatever it is you are working on. I will preface this by saying that everything is framed here like you're planning on working on a project with a story. However, I have advice that hopefully could be used on non-story based projects. I'll be referencing my own webcomic a lot in this too, since it is my current project, but don't think that this advice is only for webcomics either. And maybe you'll consider reading my webcomic too. But for now, they are for today's video. Last year, I joined Screentone's yearly art calendar for 2026, and I recorded my process for the calendar's August slot. If you want a calendar featuring multiple cool webcomics that's free to download and print, then go check it out. I'll be linking it down below. Now let's get started. I'm going to start with what I like to call the project killer. It's that thing that kills your project, sometimes before you're even going to start it. It's you. Specifically, your own perception on the thing you're making and about going about with making it. So we're going to talk about your mindset first, because I feel like when talking to other people who want to make something that's like a big project, they tend to kill it before it actually happens because of just all the work and not knowing where to start. I feel like it is the biggest hurdle to overcome, and this can be due to multiple factors, which is why it makes it such a hurdle to overcome. There's no one thing I could say to adjust your mindset, so I'm going to give multiple hard truths. And if you think I'm being mean and you don't like what I have to say, you can't be mad at me, I'm right. So, if you're afraid to start a project because you don't think your idea is unique enough and you're worried about offending someone for some reason, whatever the reason is, you need to do the one big thing. Get over yourself. I don't say it because I think it's easy to say, I'm gonna start making a thing now. Thanks, Daryl, for telling me to get over myself, and then do it. I'm saying it because you are holding yourself back from starting your project because of something that can be overcome if you work through your mindset instead of just letting anxiety win. And I'm not saying this because I'm like, well, you shouldn't use anxiety as a, excuse for not being able to start your work, you silly little being. Because I, as somebody with an anxiety disorder, knows how hard it can be. But the thing about it is you can overcome that mindset, but if you keep pushing yourself back, all you're doing is kind of making yourself feel bad for not starting the thing. I don't, like I said, this is very situational for per person, so I have like a couple of things that is the general, I see these points thrown around online, so I'm just gonna talk through some of them, and if they don't work for you, I'm sorry, but at that point then kind of think about what is, if it's you that is holding yourself back from making the project you really want to make, you gotta think, what is that reason and what can I do to push past it? It is a very hard hurdle to get over, but I believe you can get over it. So if you're somebody who's like, but what if my story isn't original enough? Here's the thing, no story is 100% original, and you're never going to come up with something that isn't at least a little bit similar to something else. I hate, it is my biggest pet peeve when people take my characters or my stories and they go, well, Daryl, this is just like so-and-so from so-and-so, or this is just like thing from thing. And here's the thing, I hate it so much, but yeah, if you take stuff down, stories down to their bare essentials, they can be pretty similar to each other. That's not saying that, yeah, you guys should keep commenting comparisons comments, please. I'm so tired of them. But, think about it like this. I am writing a story about college kids in a small town looking for monsters in the woods. And guess what else exists out there? Gravity Falls, Stranger Things, The Adventure Zone Amnesty, and probably many more stories that have already done different flavors of the same thing that I am doing for my comic. Kids looking for monsters in a small town with a bunch of woods everywhere and shit. The difference between your project and other projects is that this one is your idea. And nobody is going to make your idea the way you are going to make it. And if you are passionate about your story and you take the time to make the story you believe that it could be, then nobody is going to care if, hey, your monster hunting story about college kids in the woods is too much like Gravity Falls. They're not going to care. And if you're thinking, but Daryl, what if I offend someone? And listen, I'm gonna hold your hands for this. If you are on purpose being ignorant and hurtful towards people in your project, or you're making something for the sole purpose of being offensive, then you have nothing to worry about. You are going to be fine, because one hard truth you have to accept is that not everybody is going to like the thing that you're going to make. There are people who are going to skip by it and be like, this doesn't interest me. There's going to be people who look at it and be like, I don't like how this looks. There are going to be people who will get offended by whatever you make just because they either want to be a hater or for whatever arbitrary reason. But those are not the people you should be focusing on. If you are making a project, and you are not making a project for the specific purpose of hurting people, you want to focus on the people who actually like the stuff you make. You don't want to be focusing on the people who won't like the stuff you make. And if you do the whole like artist thing of having to market yourself, you're going to find more people who are going to like the stuff you make. But if you're trying to make something that is palatable to people, regardless of who they are, you're not going to make a thing that you want. You're just trying to make a thing that will be popular. Like, don't neuter yourself ahead of time because you think people are going to be offended by what you write. If you see some of the arcs I have coming up in InHarmony, and like, I'm saying this as a place of somebody who has been making videos on YouTube for over a decade, so yeah. Trust me, pepper steak is a thing. The number of people who got so offended over me using a song from Off is still the most mind-boggling thing that I have ever had happen to me. And you got to accept that you cannot please everybody. Trying to make something that is as inoffensive or corporate neutral as you can make it is only going to hinder yourself, and it's not going to allow you to make the project you want to make. Remember, first and foremost, your project is yours. It is your project, not you. If you want something to share to people, that's fine. But if you don't like making the thing you're making, why are you making it? But I'm writing a story and it involves a region I'm not from, or a minority group I'm not a part of, and it takes place in the past in a time period I'm not completely familiar with, and I'm afraid of portraying all of those things wrong. And this is where I'm going to hold you by the face. Like, not like Gordon Ramsay, you're an idiot sandwich, but I'm not going to call you an idiot sandwich. Instead, I am going to say, you need to get over yourself. You need to get over yourself. I want to dissect this one a little bit because this comes up a lot on the internet when talking about writing groups or regions or whatever that you are not familiar with. And I think some people have a hard time getting into a less debilitating mindset over this. So we'll start small beans. History. Museums will have historical information on their websites about the things that they have on display and the time periods they are from. If you need something that is more specific, there are history YouTubers, documentaries, informational websites, podcasts, and such to get you started. One neat trick that I found if you wanted to write about a certain thing is what movies get wrong about insert subject here on whatever search engine you use, and you'll get a more accurate answer about what you want to write about. This won't really work for most stuff, but if you're say what people get wrong about 1920s Norway, then you might find something there. But it helps for smaller what people do wrong in movie stuff. For example, for me, the real-life history of the labor movement involving Appalachian miners in the late 1910s to 1920s is very relevant in my webcomic, and since I decided that it was going to be relevant in my webcomic, I have been reading books and articles and watching documentaries about that time period and that history in order to write my stories, world building for the way I want it to be, when I get to the more relevant parts of why this portion of US history is important in my webcomic. And also, going to the library is a great option because libraries exist, and if you don't have access to a library, you can also get audiobooks. And if you don't know where to start, usually by finding one source to research your historical period, it will lead you eventually to other sources because of citations and such. So, for example, I've said before, but despite writing a webcomic that takes place in West Virginia, I have never lived anywhere in Appalachia. I am not Appalachian, I'm from Southern Virginia, but I'm not from Appalachia. And my base knowledge of the region was super minimal when I decided that this webcomic was going to take place in West Virginia. My only, awareness of the prejudice for that region that people have towards it, specifically, was from, and you won't believe, of all things, a Tumblr post about insensitive Halloween costumes. But I didn't know where to start my own research because my biggest worry at the time was if the regions, if the opinions about the region are as biased as they are, and there are plenty of people who make money off of flaunting poverty in Appalachia, then where am I gonna find legitimate sources about the history of the region, what's like living in the region, what the issues from that time period versus now are, that isn't going to be biased and poverty porn? Well, because I listened to the show Old Gods of Appalachia when I was on Twitter, back when Twitter was not shit, thanks Muskrat, I saw that they had retweeted a post by another podcast called Appodlatcha. Appodlatcha is a show I recommended before. It's a talk and interview show that is mostly political, but it's through a leftist lens, and it has the goal of breaking the stereotypes that people like certain vice presidents profit of with their mediocre books. And although I wouldn't use Appodlatcha now as a primary source of information for the Appalachian region, what the show did for my research was to point me in the direction of people and articles and books and movies and more to understand the region better. The diversity in who they talk to and what they talk about, as well as talking about their own lives growing up in West Virginia, gave me different places to look at to continue my own research. The next bit I'm going to be mean about, but I'm going to preface this by saying this has to be said because I think people overthink. There is an anxiety I see on the internet, primarily from white and or non-queer part of the internet specifically, that involves righting certain minority groups' wrongs in work of fiction, and it is justified obviously for reasons because there are a lot of media that relies on stereotypes, and there's people who refuse to do their research on the cultures they want to have in their stories, and just certain lack of tact for writing anything that they want to write about. I do want to preface this by saying if you are not a part of these groups, you shouldn't be writing a story about being a part of these groups. I am specifically talking about this in terms of writing characters who are in these groups. I don't think a cis man can write accurately what it's like to be a trans man. I'm sorry. Because of this, people are afraid of messing up when writing certain groups of characters, and I get that, but if your inability of working on a project with a story that involves characters belonging to minority groups is hindering you from actually starting your thing, then I need you to ask yourself, are you writing this character from this group because you see them as a person, or you see them as a diversity label? Do you see this character as someone with agency and significance in your story outside of their race, religion, or queer identity? Or does this character exist so you can say your story has diversity points in it, and now that you have to do the work to have this character be accurately a part of this group, you're starting to get cold feet in it. If your story needs characters in certain minority groups because it is important for the story for reasons or because you want them there, then these are the hard questions you have to ask yourself, because it's the difference between having a story with well-written, developed, and diverse characters, and a story featuring a group of 4 differently flavored white guys and the one black character whose role is just to mostly be there. And that is a position that I find a lot of people have been in, and that is a position that I found myself being in before. I'm white, I'm agnostic, and I'm queer, but more than half the cast of my webcomic are people of color, and some of them have religious upbringings different from my own. I don't know what it's like to be a Catholic Filipino trans woman, or from a mixed Jewish family, or even what it's like to be polyamorous, but these were the serious questions I asked myself when making these decisions about the characters I'm writing, and that's what you need to be asking yourself. And I've messed up writing characters in the past. and I'm probably gonna mess up in the future, but if you're too scared of messing up to do anything, you're never going to get anything done. There's a difference between purposely being ignorant and writing the characters that you want to write from groups that you are not a part of, and messing up when doing the research and taking the criticism and using that criticism to do better in the future. And you have to get over this mindset of being afraid to do something wrong if you are not going to put the work in. If you want a diverse story and are afraid of messing up, you need to do your research, and I am going to be more of an optimist than a pessimist because I believe most people's problems are that they don't know where to start rather than not wanting to put the actual work in. I know the latter exists, I just don't think they're the majority, and that being said, I don't believe it's a minority group's job to do the research for people not in those groups. Like, don't go into random people's DMs asking them to write about their culture. Like, go do your own research and ask generally in groups if anyone would help you with writing something before you ask people who may not even want to answer you. And that being said, since I am a person who has done my own research, here are some places and accounts that have helped me get in the right direction. I will be linking them all in the description below, and I want to recommend the Tumblr accounts Writing with Color and Creating Black Characters. Writing with Color focuses on writing characters of different ethnic, religious, or racial backgrounds, and does it in a Q&A style format. What they also do is they provide resources for your own research and provide feedback on any story you're writing that includes minority groups, without feeding into the stereotypes and racism. Creating Black Characters is a blog that I found more recently. It has a whole list of lessons in writing Black characters and how to avoid writing stereotypes. A YouTuber I also recently followed called Naylissa also has a similar series about drawing Black characters if your current project involves drawing characters. If you're writing characters from a particular group, I would see if there's any websites specifically made by certain minority groups. The Trevor Project's website is full of resources you could go through to point you in the direction you may be looking for if you are unfamiliar with writing queer characters or the queer experience. I have a character in my webcomic named Jules who is Cherokee, but I knew nothing about the Cherokee, so I found a website that was actually made by a group, and I went and I did my research starting from there. If you put site:/edu or site:/.org in the Google search bar, it will only pull up sites with domains that end in .edu or .org. I had also not had the issue of it pulling up any AI bullshit when I do it on my end, so that's also a plus. This will most likely pull up academic resources or sources straight from any group you're researching, so I recommend it to start, and then dive into their own sources and recommendations from there. If you think your project is going to be too big to keep having motivation to finish, then start small and see if you actually enjoy doing the thing before committing to a larger project. I didn't jump right into InHarmony when I got the idea for it. My last comic project got literally obliterated, and I wasn't sure if I was committed to doing another long project. Then I got my silly idea for my Magnus Archives Infinity Train crossover comic, Not Quite Somewhere Else, did an 8-page one-shot comic of it, and people liked it so much that I decided to keep going once I thought out where the rest of the story would go after that. I am not committed to this comic as I am to my original projects, and it's been like that since day one. I went into the comic with a few things in mind. I'll only put in the effort that I feel like putting into each page. I'll have it gets done when it gets done mentality for it, and if people get too annoying about the comic, I'll drop it. I don't have patience for people who are like super impatient or mean about updates, especially since, unlike InHarmony, Not Quite Somewhere Else doesn't have a regular updating schedule, and it's a fan comic, the characters aren't mine, and I have other projects I would like to get to, so if I ended up having to drop this one for annoying people, then I would. But luckily at this point I have not had that issue yet, so Not Quite Somewhere Else most likely will be finished. It ended up actually being pretty big, so it was a worry about mine, and also we're in like almost near the end of the comic, so I wanted to use it as an experiment if I was going to be committed to it as long as I was. I tested out bubbles, panel layouts, dialogue fonts, all sorts of stuff, and you can see the changes if you compare the first page to the most recent one, and you can see the difference when you compare the first page of Not Quite Somewhere Else to the very first page of InHarmony. I want to end talking about your mindset here and talk about our next subject, which is motivation. That is the big question. How do you get motivation to start, and how do you keep working on a thing without getting bored of it? Well, that's a bit of a vague question because every answer is going to be situational. The one solid thing I can say is that you cannot rely on motivation to keep working on your project unless it's something that is more of a short-term goal. Let me use my webcomic as an example. InHarmony started out as a project I wanted to do because I was angry and spiteful. I had a lot of issues with the way the animation industry was going and is still going, and it became where I vented my frustrations on it. I think anger and spite can be great emotions to get you to start on a project, but it's not what I rely on now anymore, now that I'm 4 chapters into my webcomic. What keeps me going is I have a passion to want to tell the story. I taught myself skills to keep going, so I'm not feeling overwhelmed by the work, and I just genuinely love the world, the characters, and some of these arcs that we're going to be getting into. So what made you come up with this great idea for a thing and go, well, I want to make that? Are you writing a fanfic about 2 characters you love so much and want to write the story for them? Are you crocheting something you've never made before because you want to push your skills and are determined to do so? Are you making an original webcomic with a world you've been developing for years and want to write a story about it? Whatever that feeling is, grab it and use it to begin that project. Maybe it'll power you through the whole thing, maybe not. And if it doesn't, you need to know why you really want to keep working on this thing. Maybe you want to see this fanfic end because although you're not into the media these 2 characters are from as much as you used to be, you become invested in seeing where your story ends, and an audience who is cheering you on to finish the story. You started working on that sweater, and you're not sure if you like it, but your roommate loves it, and her birthday is coming up, so maybe you'll finish it for her as a gift. Your webcomic project is going on for years and years, and there's still many more years to go, but your love for this world has continued to grow, and even when the work gets tiring, you know you can take a break and get back to it once you have a better game plan for how to continue the story. Learning discipline is an important skill to have because it is what will keep you going through a project. Set realistic goals for yourself and change them when they no longer work for you. I usually get an InHarmony page done a week, sometimes 2 if I finish a page really early in the week, or if it has very few panels, and then I spend the rest of the week working on Not Quite Somewhere Else. I've been reworking how I want to continue Not Quite Somewhere Else's production since we're so close to the end of that story, and I want to see it through so that we are not sitting around waiting multiple months for updates. But I have to have kept the schedule up for years, and it's worked very well for me since I work with both a full-time job and also make YouTube videos, so I don't really have a lot of free time to go around. But I also will take breaks. When I finish a Not Quite Somewhere Else update, I don't immediately jump into the next one. When InHarmony finishes a chapter, I give myself anywhere from a month or 2 to a couple of weeks of a break, depending on how much time off I need. Learning to step away from a project is a good skill to have and will keep you from resenting the thing you are making. And if you can't bring yourself to get back to it, then that's okay to let go and move on. Sometimes it's not meant to be, and again, it is okay. And that means what you can do is you can take what you learned from this project and put it into the next one. And sometimes you have to start the thing because if you never start it, it won't ever get made. Maybe it doesn't mean starting that right that second, but there's going to be a point where your dream project will only stay a dream, and it's up to you to decide if you'll be fine with that, or if you really want to make this thing a reality. That being said, let's move on and talk about practical things you could do to start your project. Your mindset is fixed. You know where you want to go. Now you just need to actually do it. So where do you start? I'm going to start with a couple of things that can help for more story-focused projects first. Story outlines are great because you can adjust them as you need to. My current outline for future seasons of InHarmony are just the events that happen in each season, while the Season 1 outline has been separated into chapters. You can easily do this by going, Chapter 1, this happens, Chapter 2, then this happens, and so on and so forth. The best part is, outlines don't have to be set in stone. Yes, you should know where your story is going, but if an event from Chapter 5 works better for later in the story, and you find that there is a scene in Chapter 12 it works in better, then you could do that. Just shuffle all your events around. As long as, you know, the event is not currently happening in your project, you can adjust when needed. Also, by seeing your own story out in a timeline, you can know when things need to be moved around, who needs to be adjusted, and whether or not pacing for the story is too fast or too slow. My original outline for Season 1 of InHarmony was 13 chapters long, and I managed to cut it down to 10 because I adjusted some events in the story to fix pacing problems I was having for later chapters. The thing that I really recommend is that if you're making a story, especially a bigger, longer one, that you think would take you years and years to make, then you should make a story Bible. I know it sounds like I'm adding more work to start a project, but starting a story Bible for InHarmony was what got me to think through some of the, quote-unquote blank spots in my story, and finally start writing a script for the first chapter. A story Bible is what's used in animation and games a lot, but it's basically a document that has all the information about your story, such as the characters, the world building, important events, plot beats, art styles, and more. Like an outline, you don't need this thing polished before starting the story. Mine for InHarmony is very much a whip, even though it's almost 100 pages long at this point. I have it organized with an index, and it's what I go to find any information I may need about my world and what's in it, all in one neat document. And again, If starting what seems like a new project stresses you out, you don't have to finish it before you start your project. All I did was put down information I had already thought about, what was necessary for the story, and I just continue adding onto it as I'm going back and reworking stuff for my story. Most of my current work on it these days is just fine-tuning and updating, but its broad strokes such as important events, dates, characters, location names, and things like that are all there. So whenever I'm like, oh hey, I wonder what the supermarket in Aria is called, I could just go in there. I do have a character who works at the supermarket. If you like, for example, if your story's setting is in a fantasy town where logging is a big part of the town's economy that spans back thousands of years, it'll probably be important to know where the logging itself happens, who runs the logging sites, if there are any major economical and political implications because of the logging. But we don't really need a super detailed history running back thousands of years about logging in this one town. Unless your story is all about learning about the thousands of years of logging in this one town, then I guess that's fine. But if your characters are only if your characters just grow up in this town, they probably know at the very least that information, and anything else is flavor text you can add into it later. Another thing that you could do to start a new project is breaking it down into steps. For example, I know some webcomic artists who will work on a page in steps by doing line art one day, coloring another, rendering a different day. My own comic making step is I just start working on a new page every Monday, and then when that page is done, I spend the rest of the week working on that quite somewhere else. Unless I have something that's far more important coming up I have to get done. This has mostly worked for a while, even though I say I'm reworking how I'm working on that quite somewhere else so I could finish the story sooner, but find out how you could break your project down into as many steps as you need to find a rhythm that works for you. And don't be afraid to change it if you have to. If you're making a plushie, maybe dedicate one day to making a pattern for a prototype, then work on the prototype itself the next day, and then on the next day fix what you didn't like on the prototype to make a new pattern for the second prototype, and so on and so forth. Again, you don't need to be working on your project every day. I take breaks from InHarmony when I finish a chapter, whether it's just for a week or more, and if I feel myself really losing steam, I stop working on what I'm working on that day, even if all I managed to do was line art a panel. If you love your project, don't do things that purposely make you hate it just because of some imaginary deadline. If you don't have an actual deadline for your project, then there is no need to treat it like you do. If you have to go on a hiatus for your project, it is fine. You just, if it's something that involves a viewer base, you just gotta let them know. I personally would rather have the creators of my favorite things go on hiatus and take as long as they need for them to go back to the thing I enjoy them making, rather than them pushing through making the thing just because I want more updates. And the final thing I want to talk about with starting a project is the fear of not finishing it, and the thing is, do not be afraid if you end up not finishing your project. Again, InHarmony was born from the deaths of multiple unfinished webcomics I attempted in the past. I literally made a whole video about them. And many of those stories were passion projects of mine at the time, and now they're dead. So if you're scared of not finishing your project, don't be. Instead, if you find yourself losing joy in your project and ultimately make the decision to shelve it, then take it as a lesson for the next project you'll do. Because to get better at something, you have to actually do the thing. And failing at a thing is better than not doing it at all. And who knows, when you circle around to the next new thing, you might just have an easier time of making the thing. I believe in you! And that's it for this video. I hope my tips helped and you're inspired to start working on your thing. Here's the finished art. If you want to download your own copy of the Screentones 2026 calendar, I will have a link to it in the description, as well as a link to the printing instructions. Speaking of projects, you should go read my webcomic if you haven't already. I talked about it so much in this video, I hope at this point you know what it is. I update it every Sunday, and we're nearing the halfway point of chapter 4, so go check it out. This year, I want to hopefully get this channel monetized, so if you're watching this far, you are already going ahead and helping me get a bit closer to it. I have been working very hard behind the scenes on other stuff, and I am excited to do more videos in the future. I got cool ideas of things that I'm hoping you guys will like watching. But if you are a fan already of this channel and you want to support me, then consider becoming a patron, where you can have early access to InHarmony pages, concept art, animation whips, and more. My next animation is going to be mostly done in Blender. I've been teaching myself how to use Blender more, and I posted a whip recently for patrons, so go check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!